Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known on this Thursday, January 27th, 2022. Journalistic integrity versus the race to beat Twitter. Are mainstream news outlets sacrificing the integrity in order to be first with the story, even if that story has more holes than Swiss cheese? Well, it's been 3 years, or nearly 3 years, since former Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax was accused by two women of sexual assault, charges he adamantly denied and still remains uncharged criminally today. But as the Burke file and Capitol Hill journalist Lauren Burke notes, from day one, his guilt was assumed and his resignation immediately demanded. Lauren says there are confirmable facts about the allegations, all in the public domain, but never reported by mainstream media. It definitely begs the question, is media becoming more political and biased, in particular when it comes to the hashtag #MeToo movement and their allegations? We'll discuss this morning with Lauren Burke and as well as Paris Brown, the associate editor of the Baltimore Times. But first, let's bring on James Wright of the Washington Informer as we go over the headlines this morning.
Good morning. Always great to be here.
Good to have you, James. Well, when President Joe Biden campaigned for office and after he took office, he said that he wanted to appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court. Well, he now has that opportunity, as we got word yesterday that today, Justice Stephen Breyer, the senior liberal wing member, is expected to announce his retirement at the White House this morning. James, this is an opportunity that the president's been looking forward to, although it's not going to change the dynamics. It's still going to be a largely conservative court. This gives an opportunity to back up one of those campaign promises of putting a Black woman on that court.
Well, during the latter part of the Obama talk about putting a Black woman on the court, but instead President Obama selected Merrick Garland. Now, we have the chance to make history,
and the fantastic thing about it is that we have
Black women who are eminently qualified to sit on high court.
Well, one of the things to watch for, James, is the actions of Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Senator Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, because, again, it's a 50-50 split in the Senate. Of course, Vice President Kamala Harris has the tie-breaking vote, but this is going to be interesting because they have the power, as they continue to show, to block the president's initiative, his agenda. What are you looking forward to this when it comes to the Supreme Court nomination? Remember, the Republicans pushed through two Trump nominees, breaking the filibuster to do so, and also in one case, the last case, right, 8 days before the election.
Well, remember the Mitch McConnell changed the rules. Now, when we're dealing with Supreme Court nominees, you only need 51 votes. So as a result, I think that this will be okay. And I think Manchin and Sinema will get in line as they should. And you're going to have some moderate Republicans, such as Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Rob Portman, Mitt Romney, and Tim Scott. And let me say Tim Scott again, should get in line and support the president's nominee. One quick thing, Stacey, Black women, sisters, keep an eye on this. If Tim Scott does not vote for this nominee, he has got to be held accountable by Black women. He did not support the sister who was nominated for Attorney General. He needs to be held accountable.
So why are we putting that on the shoulders of just Black women? Don't Black men got to hold them accountable too?
Of course, I agree with that.
Just checking, James, just checking. Also in the news this morning, relatives of a Black man who was fatally shot on a camping trip last month in Pennsylvania called his death a lynching and have expressed frustration that several people were detained but not arrested or charged. The man, Peter Bernardo, he was 29 years old, Pittsburgh, was shot multiple times at a Rockland Township residence on December the 12th. Pennsylvania State Police said this month that the 4 individuals who were present at the time of the shooting were questioned and released after consultation with the district attorney's office. Police said in a statement that they had urged patience as investigators await ballistics data and toxicology and laboratory test results. Now, this gentleman went on a camping trip with all white folks. This is what his family says, James, and they say there's been no accountability whatsoever. They don't believe that this was an accident at all. They call it a lynching.
It certainly looks that way. The NAACP needs to get involved with this. Pennsylvania has an excellent NAACP operation. They need to get involved. This needs to be resolved. This nonsense has got to stop.
Well, you know, it's one of those situations, James, where there's really no eyewitnesses except the perpetrators. So how do they handle that?
I'm not a legal expert on that, but let me just say this. All sides of the story have to come out. And when it comes out, it has to be judged by a judge. Again, I stress, the NAACP needs to get involved with this, and they need to throw their resources behind this, because if you say it's a lynching, it probably was a lynching.
Well, also in the news this morning, scientists are now closely monitoring a new mutation of the Omicron variant. The World Health Organization confirmed on Wednesday that the Omicron swarming the world has been identified, or the subvariant has been identified as BA2. It's an offshoot of the highly transmissible Omicron variant. And they say it's not yet a variant of concern, but it has made its way to the United States. It is in Washington State. There have been 2 confirmed cases in the state of Washington. Folks are wondering what's next, James.
Well, here's what they need to do. People need to get vaccinated. People need to get boosted. People need to practice social distancing. People need to wear face masks. We don't need governors of the states saying that face masks should be optional, especially for children. People need to wear face masks and have those anti-coronavirus, I should say, measures.
Well, we'll see as, again, the World Health Organization has identified a subvariant to the Omicron, the BA2. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. This morning, journalistic integrity and social media. The events of February 2019 changed the course of political history in Virginia. The race to beat Twitter has led to journalists failing to investigate serious allegations. None of this should last endlessly on the public record without thorough investigation. We discussed with Lauren Burke of the Burke File and Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to obviously start with you, Lauren. I know you've been on this for a long time, trying to shed some light and doing a spectacular job. Journalistic integrity, right? Where is the integrity? We know that the Me Too movement, folks have been found guilty in the court of public opinion, and they have not been able to get their reputation back. And in the case of former Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, essentially it cost him an election.
Yeah, well, obviously. And, you know, I come at this on a few different angles. Obviously, I've been in journalism for 20 years, over 20 years, but I've also worked in the federal government, state government, and I was a media advisor for Justin Fairfax. So I saw firsthand behind the scenes what was going on with him. It was pretty extraordinary, because in the journalistic world I came up in at ABC News, you have to check all of these things. When I worked at ABC News, the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke. So I saw Jackie Judd and Chris Vlasto in the background. Chris Vlasto is now at CBS News, checking things, and they were very thorough with that. Obviously, a very huge story. But in the case of Justin Fairfax, I would defy anybody to find a quicker rush to judgment than the rush to judgment on Justin Fairfax. Literally a press release coming out, and the New York Times and other media organizations printing that a rape allegation without investigating it. There's no way they could have investigated it because they printed hours after a press release, so hours after the allegation. And I think what makes that happen in large part is social media, is Twitter, is this sort of, paranoia about having to beat Twitter and beat social media to the punch. All Justin Fairfax really could do is ask for it to be investigated. He was completely ignored. I watched him contact the FBI and saw his attorneys contact two prosecutors, both of whom are Black women, in Boston and Durham, Satana DeBerry and Rachel Rollins, who is now a U.S. attorney because Biden just appointed her as a U.S. attorney. But Justin Fairfax was an assistant U.S. attorney who had been through 2 FBI background checks because he was a clerk on terrorism cases in the Eastern District. So he wasn't just some guy off the street. I mean, this guy, he had gone to DeMatha Public High School. He had gone to Columbia University, Duke University, and he was an assistant U.S. attorney who, by the way, had worked on sex crimes. None of that mattered. And it just sort of went out the window the minute he got accused. He was like the guy on the street corner. And I just watched the media really just sort of take on a pack mentality and not really check anything and just sort of decide he was guilty. And then that was it. And I thought that was extraordinary. Here we are 3 years later, and still it never has been investigated. We have major media organizations that have the resources to investigate, such as the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Associated Press. They have not investigated it. In the case of the New York Times, they have never spoke to Justin's accusers and yet ran piece after piece on this story without actually. And so I would defy anybody who reads Me Too stories. They have 2 of the best Me Too reporters at the New York Times, Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor. I read their book, She Said. It was excellent, very well documented. They did so much reporting, and it took a long time. Sensitive reporting that takes a long time. We all understand that. And nobody at the New York Times actually spoke to Justin's accusers, which just makes no sense. Right. If you look at any of the Me Too cases that we all know, whether it's Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, obviously the Cosby case, all of that, they've spoken to accusers. R. Kelly's case, they spoke to accusers. Somehow with Justin's case, none of that happens. It's like a different set of rules and a different set of things that happen. I think we have to remember this happened in 2019 before Joe Biden was accused of sexual assault by Tara Reade. You'll notice that after the sexual assault allegation against Joe Biden, there was a sort of different view of things about investigate. The media just decides that, okay, Tara Reade's guilty. Tara Reade is not telling the truth. They investigate her thoroughly. If you remember, PBS and the New York Times spoke to 40 Biden staffers, 50 Biden staffers. None of that happened with Justin Fairfax. So it was that's completely different things. And it's just extraordinary to think about that.
And that's all you're saying here, right? That's what you're asking for. It's just a fair investigation. From what I'm hearing from you, Justin Fairfax was willing to talk to whomever he needed to talk to, right? He wanted to clear his name, and this is not about guilt or innocence or proclaiming guilt or innocence. This is about fairness as far as the media is concerned, correct?
Absolutely. So, if you haven't spoken to somebody making a serious criminal allegation, I don't know how you assess credibility as a journalist. So it's one thing to say, we have spoken to these people, we have investigated, and we find them to be credible. It's another thing to not do any of that and just keep writing over and over that Justin Fairfax is accused. So he has to wear this thing of being accused for the rest of his life, which, by the way, Joe Biden doesn't have to do, or Chuck Schumer, who was also accused falsely. It was like just this basically Jack Berkman at work in the background. We've now seen several cases. Me Too is about 3 or 4 years old. And we've seen several cases that appeared one way in the beginning and then changed. I think the Harold Ford case was a good example of that, right? The Alex Morris case up in Boston when he was running for Congress. Richelieu Dennis, who's the CEO of Shea Moisture, was accused anonymously on Medium. And then there was an investigation by a law firm and it blew the whole story up, right? And the Keith Ellison case, I would argue the Doug Wilder case, Doug Wilder was accused by somebody and then the Virginia Commonwealth University investigated that blew that up. So, you got to be careful with things that we know that we can't prove one way or the other before publishing. So, and Me Too is inherently like that. You can't prove these things. It usually involves 2 people. And unfortunately, with the media with Justin Fairfax, that never actually happened. So it's a strange situation.
And we saw in cases, like T.I. and Tiny, the hip hop stars, who said, "Look, you're making these accusations against us. We're going to sue you," and they actually filed suit against one of the accusers. Is that something that perhaps Justin Fairfax and others who've been accused, is that a tactic that they are able to use?
Well, Justin Fairfax did sue CBS for $400 million in September of 2019. The fact of the matter is if you are a public official, I don't want to go down the big rabbit hole of talking about defamation law, but I'm just going to get to the point here. It's virtually impossible to win a defamation case if you're a public official. Media organizations know that, which is why you see certain things being printed very quickly, on people like Andrew Cuomo and Al Franken, and then of course Justin Fairfax. They know they can't win a defamation case. If it's a private citizen, yes, particularly if it involves a sexual allegation. But as you can see in the Andrew Cuomo case right now, there are certain things that are being revealed about the accusers of Andrew Cuomo that call into question the initial reporting. You have one accuser who Eric Wemple wrote about in the Washington Post like 2 weeks ago, about how the media basically buried the fact that she is in another court case fabricating a sexual assault allegation. Well, that was something that wasn't reported by anybody until very recently. And that was a main accuser of Andrew Cuomo. So that stuff like that sort of tells us that we might want to be a little bit careful about what we report before we report it. And I just felt like a lot of what we were saying, just sort of the political heft and weight of the Me Too movement and people just wanting to be on the side of a woman accusing and not really looking at facts as they would in any other case. But in something this private, one would think, let's be real. We've seen stories where there was evidentiary things. There were things like police reports, medical records, hard evidence, diary entries, maybe emails to friends, maybe text messages to friends. And unfortunately, in some of these cases, you don't have any of that, and yet the story gets printed because, to answer your question, an elected official, because of time, Sullivan cannot win. You're seeing the Palin case right now, literally this week, play out in federal court, and that's going to matter a lot when it comes to elected officials and these types of allegations.
Yeah, Paris Brown, she Lauren, of course, raises a lot of great points. And one of the biggest points, of course, again, what responsibility does the media have when it comes to someone making a serious allegation, be it sexual assault or anything?
Well, even at the Baltimore Times, we're a small community paper, and people believe what's printed, right? Yeah. They're going to believe that. So there is a responsibility to, and they know that. So they know, like Lauren said, if I go out and I print this, I planted a seed. And so once you plant that seed, it is very difficult. In the case of Justin Fairfax, I question, was it a political smear? I mean, it was so coincidental when you look at what happened with the governor, and then these women, they come out of nowhere and they went away as quickly as they appeared. And there's a lot of evidence that was, and they weren't investigated. So I agree with Lauren. We have great investigative reporters, both at the New York Times as well as the Washington Post, that could simply state the facts. If you just look at the facts, you would question the allegations. So, yeah. And this whole social media, right? The whole name of the social media. Some people actually look at social media as news. Believe it or not, you have people that have a microphone, and you have people that have followings, and they believe that that's how they find out the news for the day. They say, I read it on Facebook, with no vetting, and so it's really undermined, I think, this industry.
So James, right? Let me ask you, James. What tends to happen? They bring up these points, but what tends to happen is you get canceled, right? Whether you're a media outlet or a media personality, if you question a woman's claim that she had been sexually assaulted. Now, it's not to say that they're not telling the truth, but you tend to get canceled. Is that what's driving some of this, James?
Yes, it is. let me just say that any woman who has had to go under harassment deserves to be rectified. In that, the Me Too movement is absolutely correct. But that doesn't give certain people the right to make accusations that are totally baseless. Now, let's talk about what this is really about in terms of Justin Fairfax. He was a heartbeat away from being the governor of Virginia. There are some people in Virginia who are not comfortable with an African American governor. They've already had one, as Lauren mentioned, Doug Wilder, but he had a chance to be the other one, considering with Northam was in trouble during, if you recall, Black Faith. So that's why these accusations just came out of nowhere, and it didn't get past people like me.
Well, let me get past you, huh, James? We had Bill Clinton, President Clinton, and at the Monica Lewinsky situation, he was impeached by the House for that, but it didn't seem to do anything to his future at that time, right? Of course, Donald Trump won the presidency with allegations that were being litigated, right? And then, as Lauren mentioned, President Biden had allegations. So what makes Justin Fairfax, and really, let's face it, Justin Fairfax and other African Americans different from these individuals, Lauren?
Well, I think Brent Staples over at the New York Times did it better than I could do it. He wrote a piece on the history of the way Black people are covered by large media organizations. You'll remember that recently the KC Star did a self-study on their racial reporting that was very frank and very blunt, and other papers have done that as well. But clearly, being a Black male in this moment is really inconvenient. Okay, so we know about cases like Brian Banks and Anthony Broadwater and the Kevin Strickland case, where you got a guy in the Kevin Strickland case in Missouri that was adjudicated through a court of law, okay, on a triple homicide. And it turns out that more than 40 years later, he's exonerated. Okay, that's the type of case we look up and see all too often. We know about the Scottsboro Boys. We know about Central Park 5. We know about the Groveland 4, the Norfolk 4, actually are 4 white guys in Virginia that were prosecuted incorrectly for rape and murder. But the Martinsville 7 in Virginia, where you have these notorious cases involving Black men and specifically false sexual allegations. So there's a history for this. And I just think that, to be blunt, as somebody who has worked at some major media organizations, I actually was filling in for somebody for 6 months back in 2005 or 6 at the Washington Post. These are fairly lily white media organizations that don't have any Black men around that could tell them anything about what goes on.
Would they even listen?
I think actually they might listen if at least you had a voice in there. I don't think it's a coincidence to look up and see that Kevin Merida and Darren Sands and Wesley Lowery, Black men at the Washington Post don't seem to last very long for some reason. I'm not sure what that's about. But the Post doesn't have anybody who is African American in a senior position who's in an editorial meeting who could say, hey, one of Justin Fairfax's accusers also accused a second person of rape who played basketball, who's a very well-known grad, just as Justin Fairfax was. We should look into that and report it, and it would be very hard for 2 people at Duke University who are African-American males, one of whom is 6'4", 220 pounds, to walk around and nobody tapped them on the shoulder in 1999 and 2000 and say, hey, there's a rumor about you we need to sit and talk about. Remember that Justin Fairfax was the student trustee on the board of trustees of Duke University at the time, sitting next to Melinda Gates, okay, and other very prominent people on the Duke board of trustees. So if there was any rumor about him of controversy, one would think, particularly on a white campus like Duke University in the South, that somebody would have said, hey, we're hearing things, we're hearing something, we need to sit down and talk. That never happened. So I just think common sense dictates that this should be looked into by a lot of people, including, frankly, law enforcement, because I'm the kid of a cop and I'm the aunt of a former cop in Virginia Beach. And I've heard their stories my entire life. Some of their stories have been true, some have been false. And human nature is a very complex thing. I just think that everything should be investigated. I'm not a fan of this idea of just believing things without evidence. And as a journalist, I've never been like that. You got to show me something more than just somebody talking and somebody's lawyer putting out a press release, and then that somebody disappearing for 3 years. It just makes no sense. So I do think that, Justin being an African-American male is certainly a factor here. You saw what happened with Joe Biden. Joe Biden gets accused and all the reporters figure out a way to exonerate him. It's like amazing talking to, which they should have, by the way they investigated Joe Biden case with regard to Tara Reade, to me, was the proper journalistic way you do it. That was the Megan Twohey, Jodi Kantor, New York Times way that we see in the book She Said, where we talk to everybody, we get character references. That did not happen with Justin Fairfax, and I have no idea why. This man is a former assistant U.S. attorney. I mean, it wasn't like he had been in trouble, and I asked him point blank, I said, you haven't been suspended from school, like anything, nothing, just nothing. And same thing with the other person that one of his accusers accused, who I had no idea who he was, basketball player named Corey Maggette. I don't follow college sports, but apparently Corey Maggette is a very big deal in basketball. And he had nothing. He had nothing, and his name is out there. Once your name is out there with the word sexual assault or rape or something, and your name is attached to that, your life is going to change. And with no evidence, that's what happened to these two men. And I cannot figure out why nobody wants to investigate that thoroughly.
Well, here's the thing too, Paris. Let me go to you for this as well, because again, I hear everything what Lauren's saying, but oftentimes we heard, especially during the Me Too era, that when a woman makes an allegation, that should be enough. In fact, I think the most scary thing I've heard throughout the entire Me Too movement was when Harvey Weinstein was convicted, and the district attorney of New York, Manhattan, Cyrus Vance, made these comments. He said, and I quote, he said, the allegation itself should be enough for conviction. That is the most scariest thing a Black man especially could hear. Paris, your thoughts?
No, that's not enough. There has to be investigation. And in the case of Justin Fairfax, we're also looking at what are motives. I find that if you continue, and Lauren talks about the pack, if you continue to go after a person, it's difficult to come from under that. We have too many good investigators that could, like Jodi and Jodi Kantor, that can investigate this. Even if we're putting out just the facts, I just think that there needs to be more accountability for those just putting out, like you say, the press releases. That things should be vetted. We do that every single day. We won't even put out a picture unless we know that it's from a source that we document as a good source. I don't think it's enough. And you see the case of Central Park of Karen. Knowing that you can use the power to take someone down. When you look at some of the accusers of Justin Fairfax, I mean, she was quoted as, I'm going to destroy his life. Mm-hmm. And she made that was a public statement. And I don't, as a woman, I would not demean any accusation of a woman. As a woman, but I do believe that also the accused also has a right or opportunity to have the facts fairly presented.
Yeah, I'll make a slight correction there. One of Justin's accusers said what happened was one of Justin's accusers had a restraining order from an ex-boyfriend.
Yeah,
and the case went to court in Maryland. And the boyfriend got up and the judge says, well, what did she say to you? And how did she threaten you? And the boyfriend says, well, she threatened to destroy my life. So it was the boyfriend of one of Justin's accusers that said, she was trying to destroy my life.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So when even this conversation, for instance, and I want, Lauren, I want you to get to that timeline shortly, but even in this conversation, folks will take this as bashing the accusers. We're not at all. Do you feel we are bashing the accusers at all here, James?
No, I don't think that's the situation. Corey Maggette, who is somebody that I have known and I've interviewed, was just thrown under the bus. That's not right. You know, all of this talk is really hurting women who have legitimate claims of being sexually harassed. And you know, you have that culture with Harvey Weinstein for many years where the casting can couch. And then, you know, and then these two people make these accusations against Justin Fairfax, and it just blows it out of the water. But again, I stress this was really harped on because Justin could have become the governor of Virginia.
Well, let's also say this. Me Too was founded by Tawana Burke, a Black woman, right? And it was really about what you're saying, the casting couch, but it wasn't much about the casting couch as it was about workplace sexual harassment. This became immediately hijacked, right, by white women in Hollywood, basically the Me Too movement, and it became weaponized, these accusations, knowing that they're not going to be investigated by the media, which makes it very dangerous for the media itself to play this game, right, of not investigating. Lauren, you can take us through the timeline with Justin Fairfax.
Yeah, I think that what happened with Tawana Burke was really interesting. She brought up a topic on a sensitive subject that had not been discussed at all, really, which was, you know, young Black women being molested. And you're right, it turned into, primarily because the Weinstein case was the first big case, it turned into this thing where we're talking about Hollywood actresses. There's nothing wrong with talking about Hollywood actresses and Harvey Weinstein, but that became the template for the entire way that these cases were reported. And unfortunately, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey are not at every media organization, so it wasn't, the level of thoroughness is not brought to every Me Too situation. I mean, the timeline is fairly obvious. I'm sure everyone saw that Governor Ralph Northam was involved in a scandal involving his yearbook page when he was in medical school in the 1980s. And here he had a photo on his yearbook page of a guy in a Klan outfit, Ku Klux Klan outfit, and a guy in blackface. And you know what? Less than 24 hours later, we see one of Justin's accusers putting something out on Facebook, on like a Facebook Messenger thing, and then it's like on some right-wing website, and then it's on Twitter, you know, and then then we're off to the races, you know. So the problem is when things get reported without there being a real sort of look into whether or not this is legit. Because, I mean, let's be real, if you can run that, you could run that on anybody. And next thing you know, Justin is the story. Like, it went from the governor of, it was really interesting to watch as far as a media moment there was. It went from being about Ralph Northam and his yearbook page, and he might resign. Everybody's asking him to resign, from the NAACP to MoveOn.org. And then all of a sudden we're talking about the Black lieutenant governor. So to me, that right there should have been maybe a moment where, if you're covering politics, you say to yourself, that's a little unusual, right? I mean, Justin Fairfax didn't just show up 3 weeks before. He had actually run for attorney general in Virginia in 2013. And then he announced his run for lieutenant governor in 2016. So it kind of gives everybody plenty of time to check out, okay, who is this guy? You know, and he comes in as an outsider, right? He doesn't come in through the party, which I think was a factor in his case, where you have somebody that's not, quote, asking permission to run statewide in Virginia. I think that plays a part in the rush to judgment, the throwing him under the bus by a lot of Democrats. I mean, one of the ironies watching this for me was you have so many Democrats who have Black Lives Matter signs in their window and on their Twitter account and everything else. And then when something like this happens, it never occurs to them that Black men have been the target of misjustice historically in this country for really 400 years. And it never occurs to them that due process might be a good idea. Then Joe Biden, the next year in April of 2020, gets accused of sexual assault. And then it does occur to them that due process might be a good idea. So it's kind of strange to watch that double standard. If people are consistent, you know, then it's not a problem. But there is no consistency right now. in Me Too reporting. I think it did get a little bit better after Joe Biden, but again, the pressure of Twitter and people wanting to go to press immediately without checking something really thoroughly, I think is there. And also, I think you can't lose. You can't lose when you say over and over again, I believe women, I support women, I support women. You remember when Joe Biden got accused, he had to very carefully say, I support, they can come and say whatever they want, but this needs to be investigated. And then it was Nancy Pelosi and Biden talking about due process. When Justin talked about due process, he was slut shaming and how dare you question them? It's like a completely different reception for him. And it was amazing to watch.
Well, so two high-profile cases that the Black press covered, and again, this is not a testament on anybody's innocence or guilt, but you talk about in the beginning of the Cosby situation, Camille Cosby. One of the things she said, one of the things that Camille Cosby said was, "Please do me a favor, vet the accusers." We also did a expose, a several piece expose on the situation with Russell Simmons. And one of the things that we were able to find, the Black press was able to find, was that there were multiple accusations from several of Russell's accusers, even someone accusing their own father and uncle of sexual assault. And this is stuff that the mainstream media did not report and refused to report. In fact, in that case, a very, very popular magazine, if you will, actually threatened some of the people who wanted to tell the so-called truth about what happened with Russell Simmons. So we're seeing that this Me Too situation has been really, really weaponized, but the press has played a major role in this, Paris. The press has not been that press that Lauren said over 20 years ago she started. I started almost 30 years ago. I know James has been in the business for a long time, and you have. This is a different press, isn't it?
It is, and the whole Me Too movement, and you're right, it has been weaponized. I think in terms of the press, there are quite a few things happening right now, and there is, I think social media undermines the press. I think that the whole idea of the fake news is undermining the press. These whole groups that are rising and doing their own news is undermining the press, and also there is unfair treatment. There really is unfair treatment, and there really needs to be a call to action to ensure proper reporting and proper vetting of these accusers. It's interesting. Women are empowered, right? And so this power has been used incorrectly or wrongly to bring down people, and in some case with thorough knowledge, knowing that this is a powerful man, right? And if I say certain things, and like I said, I don't want to be one to discount any woman who has the right to say that this has happened to me, but I agree there has to be integrity in reporting. There has to be due process. There has to be fairness, and these accusations have to be properly vetted, because it destroys lives, and it destroys lives. And like you said, how do you come back? How you come back from that? Because it's following you. It's now a shadow, and yeah.
Yeah. I know, James.
To your point, Stacey, there was one of Justin's accusers says the same sort of thing going, where she has been talking for about 20 years about being the victim of incest, and has been a major outspoken advocate on that topic, on sexual violence in general. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just wondered why that wasn't reported. So the media seem to be playing a game of, we're not reporting anything that might call into question, these allegations. Right. You remember the Keith Ellison thing? It was the same thing too. His accuser, who was his girlfriend, had some very unfortunate sexual violence history. So I'm not sure. I mean, when we're on the same topic of what we're talking about, I don't know why that doesn't get reported. It doesn't mean that the person's lying, but it's like that's part of the story of that person's, history. So it's sort of, I mean, the thing about, we had a situation where Associated Press was one of the few news organizations that actually did some investigative thing at the beginning of what happened with Justin. And they it was two investigators named Matthew Barricott and Mike Bisecker and Mike Kunzelman. Sorry, Matthew Barricott's another AP reporter who was quite good as well. But they were reporting just basic facts. That somebody took out a restraining order. She doesn't have a job. She erased her social media right before the story broke. These are just facts that they were reporting. And one of the attorneys comes out and attacks them for slut shaming and how dare you question women. So basically the drive was to get everybody not looking into it, right? Like don't look into facts, don't look into anything. And if you're looking into something, then you're disparaging women, you're slut shaming, how dare you question them. That is sort of antithetical to what reporters are supposed to do. So, and I totally get the lineage of what they're talking about, because you remember under Bill Clinton, their whole strategy was to slut shame all the women accusing Bill Clinton and, drag them through the mud and try to, sort of break their character in the media. So I get why there's sensitivity to that. But when we're talking about facts that appear in court documents and medical records, those are facts that are not in dispute. That's not somebody's opinion, and that should play a role in reporting a story. Just the other day in the Times-Union in Albany, I was really surprised to see this, as I was to see Eric Wemple's piece in the Washington Post. They finally are starting to report some of the problems with the stories against Andrew Cuomo.
Yep.
And I thought that was really surprising, because the media with Andrew Cuomo has been just, he's guilty, that's it, we're not looking into this. I don't know whether y'all remember it, but Jane Mayer did like a 4,000 word piece on Al Franken, where she went through every single accuser. Nobody ever had done that before on a Me Too case. Jane Mayer has so much weight and heft that nobody criticized her. She did such a thorough job going through every single accuser. 3 of Franken's accusers did not want to talk to her. The main one was clearly politically involved. And Jane Mayer writes this piece that really exonerates Al Franken. Al Franken's got a podcast. Al Franken's on MSNBC. It's just like it never happened. And
Al Franken is white.
Yeah, yeah. And so I just would say, I've always said to reporters this whole time, just report the facts. Just report the facts of what happened with Justin Fairfax. I'm not asking you to do opinion, but to Paris's point, we are now gliding into the space as reporters, as media. Everybody's doing opinion and reporting. And then you get these fake news organizations that came up after Barack Obama, Daily Caller and this and that, where they leave out, Fox News, like leaving out facts, huge facts and stories. So it's not really journalism to me, but I think that people should be transparent. I don't know why Sean Hannity just doesn't say, look, I'm a Republican. I like Donald Trump. And yeah, I was advising him. Just be transparent about what you're doing. And stop acting like, you're not a Republican. Like I told people the whole time, I'm advising Justin Fairfax. I just didn't write about Virginia when I was advising him. But it's like, why not just be transparent about the work you're doing, the people and the friends you have? I've had friends that are member of Congress that I don't write about because I'm friends with them. But we're in this world of acting like there's no bias, and there is a huge bias.
Yeah, James has been wanting to jump in here. Paris, I'm sorry, let me let James jump in.
I want to make this point. As a former member of NCNW, National Council of Negro Women, let me say this. This is not what Betty Friedan was talking about when she launched the feminist movement in the 60s. This is not what Gloria Steinem was talking about when she founded Miss Magazine. My Congresswoman, Eleanor Holmes North, a strong feminist when she was with the EEOC. This is not what she was talking about. This is not what Dorothy Height, the great president, emeritus, I should say, of the National Council of Negro Women. This is not what she was talking about in terms of ratifying and making sure that sexual harassment cases were adjudicated properly. This Me Too road is not what they were talking about.
Well, also, so we mentioned Lauren and Paris. Obviously, we've been talking about Justin Fairfax. Justin Fairfax, it should be pointed out too, was never arrested, never charged. I don't know that he's even been questioned by the police. The same, we mentioned Russell Simmons, never even questioned by the police, never charged. So when you have that, but you still have this relentless media, I mean, they run, Justin is out of office. I remember asking you, Lauren, not long ago, how's he doing? And I think your response was, well as he could be expected, given what's happened. It ruins you.
Yeah,
Paris, if you want to go, I'll talk right after you. I went on for a while there, so go ahead.
No, that's okay. I just want to actually, what you said something I think that's very key, and that is we as the press also can play a role in the exoneration, right? If we're telling the facts, if we're doing the proper, and there are plenty of investigative reporters that can report to the degree that could exonerate people that have been accused by properly vetting and properly telling the story, properly telling the facts, but also with these accusers, how has their background impacted the statement? And like I said, I'm very careful to say I don't want to ever demean any woman who has felt that she has been attacked in any way.
Oh, absolutely not. Like I told you, because my dad was in law enforcement, I heard terrible stories from the crib. And there's no there was no reason not to believe any of them. I had a godmother who was murdered in the Bronx by her husband, and we never could, get anybody's attention on it. I mean, we know in the Black community that we can be talking about two things with this level of complexity at the same time. We know that violence against women happens. And we also know that things like the Martinsville 7 and Central Park 5 happen. and Black men in particular have, again, been the target of these types of things. One of the problems that the media did have that I would actually say is not the media's fault in the Justin Fairfax matter is that the media has not been able to vet, because these accusers will not grant any interviews. They basically, what happened was he gets accused in February of 2019. Nobody hears from them. This is all in the form of press releases and talking by attorneys. And then they pop up on Gayle King, because Gayle King is like the go-to interview for these types of things. I think because her friend Oprah is linked to Time's Up and the money that Oprah gave to Time's Up, and Gayle King, they want to showcase these things. But Gayle King is not an investigative reporter. She's not to be confused with 60 Minutes. She's an infotainment reporter. So they put them on, and then they're not heard from since that. Meanwhile, Justin Fairfax is in the background taking 2 lie detector tests, which, interestingly enough, the lie detector operator that conducted the test for Justin Fairfax was the same guy that did it for Blasey Ford. And that was another interesting thing that happened. So he takes the 2 lie detector tests, okay, and he passes them. And all these columns come out from various, liberal feminists that, lie detectors don't really matter. But when Blasey Ford took the lie detector test, they mattered. When Justin Fairfax takes the lie detector test, now suddenly they don't matter. But, I just think basic journalism is really what is needed. You just talk to everybody. Talk to people who went to school with Justin Fairfax and the accuser that was there who accused him and Corey Maggette. Talk to people who were at the convention in 2004. It's funny. I was at the 2004 National Convention. I did not know Justin Fairfax at the time, but it was a very security-laden convention. It was security all over the place because it was the first convention after 9/11. But my thing is, this is not 50, 60 years ago. It is a long time ago, 2004 and 2000 and 2004. But people are in their 40s. People who are in their 20s, they're in their 40s. And, I just, Duke University in particular, it's like there's so many people you could talk to at Duke who are students that knew him. He was a prominent student. Justin Fairfax delivered the commencement at the School of Public Service when he was a student. There was a standout student on campus, as was Corey Maggette. I mean, so the idea that you can't talk to people for character reference or say, hey, did you ever hear any rumor? Because Corey Maggette was involved, Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski was questioned when this story broke. And Mike Krzyzewski was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. He had heard nothing. And there were reporters down in North Carolina who had contacted us and said, we haven't heard anything bad about Corey Maggette at all. I mean, I'm reluctant to bring up Corey Maggette's name because there's no reason to bring him up. He has done absolutely nothing provably wrong. And these are the types of things, these are serious matters. And again, I say this as the cousin of a family court judge and the daughter of a law enforcement person in New York. This should not be adjudicated on Twitter. Okay. Like these.
Actually, Lauren.
Yeah. And you saw what happened with, what's the singer's name? He's from Petersburg, Virginia. The lady came out the other day on Instagram and accused him of sexual crime. And in fact, I shouldn't even say his name because again, it has not been confirmed, And so she's on Instagram talking about it. And I know that, a lot of people say, I think correctly, that law enforcement has not been good at handling sex crimes. Mm-hmm. At the same time, there's certain jurisdictions that are really good at handling sex crimes, right? Boston is one of them. New York is one of them. We just saw Harvey Weinstein get convicted for things that were alleged 30 years ago. We saw Ghislaine Maxwell, who's the boyfriend of somebody, get convicted for things that happened years ago. So they can make these convictions, but to me, professional investigators who professionally investigate this type of sensitive subject matter, they are the people who should be involved, not people playing around on Twitter. I mean, it's just me, but I just think Twitter is
well, Lauren, let me ask you this, and actually we can open this up. We only have a few minutes left, but my awesome producer and I were talking about this just last week. She mentioned the documentary Leaving Neverland, and we also saw, of course, R. Kelly's doc, and it's been other documentaries. There's a new documentary on Bill Cosby now. But here's the thing. What her problem with Leaving Neverland was, and so many others, was that the other side was totally ignored. There was no one from Michael Jackson's camp to say, you know what, let me point this out, that might be wrong. Let me point this out. No one in the new, Cosby documentary, no one from the Cosby side, and Russell Simmons' documentary, Oprah pulled out of that documentary because she felt like, wait a minute, this thing is just, something's not right here. She famously,
and Stacy has frozen. He's coming back.
He's buffering.
Okay, he's buffering. Well, I think we know what he was about to say. We do see 3 documentaries. We've seen now 3. Obviously, Surviving Neverland was one of them. Surviving R. Kelly, Leaving Neverland, and now we've got the Cosby. Can we talk about Bill Cosby? It's interesting because if you think about famous Me Too cases, to me the 3 biggest would probably be the Weinstein case, then the Epstein case, and I actually think the Woody Allen case would be the 3rd. But Woody Allen, we're not seeing any documentaries on any of those 3. I don't understand how we're only seeing documentaries on Black men. I have absolutely no.
Laura, could you talk about Bobby Scott? I mean, somebody even accused him.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. So, full disclosure, I'm friends with Bobby Scott, and he had a completely fake allegation by somebody who was a fellow in his office in 2017. So right at the beginning of Me Too movement. Unfortunately, the New York Times platformed this person for some strange reason in their paper. They did take out most of what she had alleged because it was so ridiculous. But what was then discovered, and I got to hand it to people like Heidi Presbola at the time, you have reporters that do check things. There's a reporter at the Daily Beast. He's now at Axios. He was excellent at this too. This accuser of Bobby Scott had also accused someone else of the exact same thing 3 years prior in a government office in Chicago. So what happened was, when the media was presented with this person has accused another person of the exact same thing. I mean, what are the odds? And then it turned out she had a book with 7 allegations in it that were, and it was like the same type of thing. I'm in the office and somebody says something improper to me that's sexual harassment. So it was just ridiculous, but it got in the paper. If you go to Wikipedia right now, look at Bobby Scott's Wikipedia. and you look at, if you type his name in, it comes up. I mean, it never goes away.
It
Like,
never goes.
so my thing is, this is provably false. Nobody reports an update, which is strange, right? Nobody updates and says, well, wait a minute, we found all this stuff out. Heidi Presbiller was one of the people who got it right first time and got on Morning Joe and said it, because Jack Berkman, of course, was the attorney for this person. That should have told everybody that something was wrong right there. But anyway, you do have good reporting, but man, it's in the paper. It's all over the place at the time. And if you Google it now, it still comes up. So that's, to me, is not right. You got to get the facts right before you put this stuff out.
But
Go ahead, Paris. No, I'm sorry.
The problem is social media and the sensationalism. You get more followers, right? You get more. Your Nielsen ratings go up, right? when you put something out there, right? So that translates to more money, and so there are a whole set of motives that just undermine the integrity of journalism. And there is a prominent paper, a magazine. I will not mention their name.
That bad, huh, Paris?
Name, because what they do in order to grab clicks is they'll have very adverse things on it, and it gets them clicks, right? But clicks get you advertisers, and it'll get them 250,000 clicks in a day, right? And so now they're able to sell advertising. So there are a whole lot of issues besides integrity in journalism. There are a whole lot of other things that are influencing the reporting and what is reported and how it's reported. Because there are book deals that come out of this Me Too movement. Let's look at the profit motive of some of these things. I become famous. I get $500,000. I get a book deal. I get a movie deal. So it's,
well, Paris, you just hit on it. So if you think about V2, it's the New York Times won the Pulitzer Prize. Jody Cantor and Megan Twohey won the Pulitzer Prize off their Weinstein reporting. Then they came out with a book. Mm-hmm. Then you've just got, we're having documentaries now. So once we did clicks for money, that changed the game. But if you think about it, the money side is really on the allegation side, because it gets everybody what they want. The attorneys are involved, and the traffic on the website, and the awards. I mean, so there is no money really in exoneration.
None. It's not profit making at all. It's a business. And let's Twitter needs to be regulated, right? You shouldn't be able to go up on Twitter, make an accusation, and destroy a person's life. With one tweet and one post, you have created a seed that can potentially destroy a person's life. Right. It shouldn't be that easy as submit.
Right.
It shouldn't be that easy.
And Cardi B won that case with the YouTube case. That's a game changer.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. If she gets that by appeal, that's a big deal.
That is a big deal. $4 million, and she says she intends to pursue collection of every cent of it too, and more power to her. Even these YouTube influencers, if you want to call them, they all think they're journalists anyway. But look, somebody has to draw the line somewhere. Somebody must draw the line, and here at the Black Press, we certainly try to draw the line. Integrity above all else. And look, we're not saying that women who make allegations are not truthful. We're just saying that these allegations, they destroy people if they're not true, or whether they're true or not. They destroy people. So the allegations need to be factual. But journalists, we have a responsibility to report facts. So we got to look into. Lauren has laid it out. The situation with Justin Fairfax, 3 years now. There's been no charges whatsoever. And as I asked her earlier, I don't think Justin Fairfax has even been questioned by the police, brought into a police station or anything, and detectives or anything. Right.
And can you imagine, it is amazing, right? So you have a black male accused of some serious things, and nobody's interested in adjudicating that. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen that before. And again, I do think it's the quickest rush to judgment I've ever seen. Immediate calls for resignation based on a press release. Again, if somebody has seen a quicker rush to judgment, contact me. It's lburke007@gmail. I just would like to know, maybe the McCarthy era, but I can't think of a quicker, press release comes out, it's published in major papers and major news organizations publishing that type of serious allegation with no police involvement and no prosecutorial involvement. As you just said, Stacey, so a lot of these cases, the Groveland 4, the Scottsboro boys, we know that was railroaded, all white jury. We get that. But there was at least pretending to adjudicate. Justin's case is just nothing. It's just, it's there, it's published, so I guess it must be true. Like, it's amazing to me. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned Cuomo, the Cuomo situation. Now we're seeing some startling revelations there, and yet it not only cost him his job as governor, but it cost his brother this high-profile job at CNN. So we really, really owe it to our readers, our viewers. We owe it to the public as journalists to really, really vet we have to vet the accusers, just like we have to vet the accused. We have to treat them each the same way in that sense, James, Paris, and Lauren. And we'll continue to follow this because the Justin Fairfax story should be lifted up even more. And we thank Lauren Burke for doing that this morning. Thank you, James Wright of the Washington Informer and Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.